The first time the Vera Collective laid their thousand-faceted eyes on Earth, they laughed a sound like shattering crystal echoing through the observation galleries of the dreadnought. Eternal accord, because from high orbit our little world looked pathetic clouds swirling over oceans that were mostly water instead of proper acid. Cities glowing like dying embers, and their xenologists needed less than 6 minutes to stamp the file. Pre-FTL carbon oxygen baseline tech index 0.7 aggression. High but irrelevant, recommended immediate chemical pacification and population cull to labor levels. High strategist Kreshnin pulsed violet approval and turned away, muttering about another nursery world that would kneel or dissolve, either outcome profitable, while down on the surface in the cracked asphalt graveyard outside. What was left of Denver Captain Elena Vasquez, 34, ex-Marine. Raider left arm gone below the elbow from a drone that had her name on it. Back when wars were still human against human. Stood on the hood of a Rustiton Ford pickup, watching the sky catch fire, the invasion sirens howling themselves hoarse. The first Vera drop pod slamming into the plains 20 miles west and blooming open like a nightmare flower of black glass and coral, and something older than language woke up behind her eyes. Not fear, never fear again, just a cold, clean rage that tasted like copper and gun oil. All across the bruised planet, the same story played out in different accents. In Lagos, a 17-year-old coder named Aisha rewrote drone flight code on a laptop balanced on a corpse, while acid rain ate through her hijab. In the flooded ruins of Shanghai, an old welder called Li Jianjin dragged his plasma torch out of the water and started cutting armor from subway cars because someone had to. And under the Scottish Highlands, Dr. Marcus Reed, the academic joke who insisted Earth's geology was weaponized history, stared at seismic readouts through cracked glasses and whispered they picked the wrong damn moon. The Vera called it pacification, seeding the atmosphere with catalysts that turned every cloud into concentrated sulfuric acid. Continents going John Diskello, steel girders dripping like candles, and their surrender broadcasts rolled out in every human language with that calm, paternal tone that made you want to chew glass. Lay down arms, report to processing, receive purpose, and billions did because the alternative was dissolving screaming. But the rest, the stubborn, the broken, the ones who had nothing left to lose but the chain, fought with rebar and kitchen knives and homemade napalm until the Vera tallied the dead-like points on a scorecard and scheduled Phase 2. Total biosphere replacement, Earth to become one vast acid ocean under a permanent green storm where their crystalline young could hatch in peace. They honestly believed pain made us weaker. That was their single fatal error, because Elena found the others the way wolves find wolves, by the smell of powder smoke and unburied dead. Ramirez, the Texan sniper who never missed and hadn't smiled since. Dallas Melted Park, the quiet Korean chemist carrying vials that ate Vera armor like candy. And they gathered inside the hollowed-out corpse of Cheyenne Mountain because the Rockies still stood defiant and the stone remembered older. Extinctions and their Marcus Reed met them at the blast door wearing a lab coat spotted with fuming stains, eyes shining like a prophet who'd finally been proven right, dragging them past corridors where the walls wept yellow tears to a cavern no map had ever admitted existed, a subterranean lake of liquid methane and tholin, so pure it drank the light and gave back blood color, the air thick with benzene and old murder. And he said, this is why their weapons glitch here. It's not the magnetic field, it's us, it's the planet. We named the wrong moon Titan. This is Titan. 4 billion years ago, our oceans were acid, our air was poison. We are the children of a world that tried to sterilize itself and lost, and they're trying to take us home. Elena stared into that black mirror and felt the phantom ache where her arm used to be. Remembered her little brother's last voice message cutting off mid-laugh when Seattle got its first taste of the new rain. And the rage settled into something colder, surgical, final. 3 days later, Aisha arrived, dragging a hard drive wrapped in prayer and plastic. Half her face blistered from fallout, plugged it into servers that should have been dead, and the green text woke up hungry. Every surviving satellite, every seismic sensor, every weather station singing the same beautiful lie. To the Vera, Earth looked extinct. To the humans, it looked like bait. High above, Kreshnin reviewed the victory reports and felt the tiniest fracture in its perfect certainty because some whisper of structured M noise rose from the western continent to patterned to be random. But it dismissed the anomaly. Primitives playing with corpses, irrelevant. On the ground, Elena watched Marcus lower the first device into the Tholin Lake. Not a nuke, something older and meaner. A seed bomb of hydrocarbon rage, timed to ride the pressure wave straight into the invader's atmospheric grid. Park sealing the casing with steady hands. Ramirez setting the timer without a word. Aisha uploading the virus that would make the Verizon seeding network swallow human code like poison. 60 seconds to minimum safe distance, and none of them moved. Alina just looked up through the cracked ceiling at the Venom sky and spoke the line that would become legend when the recording finally leaked. Voice Texas flat and exhausted and utterly unafraid. "Hey assholes, welcome to Titan. Population 8 billion pissed off apes and one very angry planet. We're done crying." Beneath her boots something continental shifted, tectonic plates flexing like a waking god. The first clear drops of a new rain, hydrocarbon holy water, started to fall. And on the eternal accord every alarm screamed at once, as the bruised face of Earth split along a seam older than mammals. Continents shrugging like armor, something vast and chemical, and smiling rising from the wound, while Kresh-9 finally understood the mistake. They hadn't conquered a nursery world, they'd kicked a hornet's nest the size of a planet, and Titan wasn't weeping anymore, it was laughing. The detonation didn't look like victory from the inside. It felt like the mountain itself took a breath and screamed. The Tholen seed cracked open along the mid-Atlantic ridge first, then the Ring of Fire, then every forgotten fault line humanity had ever mapped, and named after dead men, and the planet exhaled a billion-year-old fury that turned the Vera's own acid clouds into something far worse. Hydrocarbon sleet that froze on contact with their crystalline lattice and shattered them from the inside out. The eternal accord lasted 11 minutes once the counter-rain began. Kresh-9's final transmission was a single harmonic note of pure disbelief before the dreadnought folded like wet paper and burned all the way down through atmosphere that no longer belonged to the collective. Alina Vasquez watched the fireball streak across the Venom sky from the lip of Cheyenne's emergency vent. Prosthetic fingers dug into Ramirez's shoulder, hard enough to leave bruises, and for one heartbeat she waited to feel triumph. But all that came was the hollow echo of her little brother's laugh cutting off mid-sentence again. Seattle, dissolving. Mom's last text, tell the kids grandma loves them, arriving 3 hours after the processing center in Tacoma, had already been slagged. Triumph tasted like ash and someone else's blood. They stayed underground another 47 days while the surface cooled from boiling to merely apocalyptic. Park brewed coffee from reclaimed beans and intravenous dextrose because real water still ate the enamel off your teeth. Aisha taught the servers to dream in binary lullabies so the radiation wouldn't T-drive the last coders insane. And Marcus Reed walked the Tholen corridors talking to rocks like they were old war buddies who finally come home drunk and ready to fight. Ramirez cleaned his rifle every night, same 17 strokes on the bolt carrier, same whispered Spanish prayer his abuela taught him in a border town that didn't exist anymore. And Alina watched them all and felt the old Marine officer part of her trying to rebuild a chain of command out of ghosts. She caught herself counting heads the way she used to count ammo park. Hands shook when she thought no one saw. Aisha woke screaming for a mother who'd been rendered down into fertilizer outside Lagos. Marcus hadn't slept more than 20 minutes since the detonation because every time he closed his eyes, he saw the Great Dying playing on repeat. And Alina realized the chain wasn't steel anymore. It was scar tissue, and scar tissue could hold a man together, but it tore if you pulled too hard. One night, the geothermal turbines coughed and the lights dimmed to emergency red, and they found Marcus knee-deep in the Tholen Lake holding a shard of Vera crystal the size of a human heart, its inner light pulsing slow and wounded. "It's still alive," he whispered, voice raw. Kresh-9 ejected its core at the last second. Parachuted the bastard right into our backyard like a middle finger. The shard sang when he touched it. A low harmonic that made Alina's fillings ache and her phantom arm burn colder than liquid nitrogen. Park wanted to dissolve it in acid. Ramirez voted to shoot it until it stopped glowing. Aisha just stared like it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen, which terrified Alina more than the idea of it exploding. But Marcus, crazy brilliant Marcus, cradled the thing against his chest and said they had to keep it, had to listen because the Vera weren't evil. They were just old, older than mammals, older than trees, and old things get scared the same way young things do, only slower and with bigger guns. That was the first night Alina almost put her pistol in his mouth and pulled the trigger for mercy. Instead, she sat with him in the dark and let him talk until the words ran out. He told her about growing up in Glasgow shipyards, about his wife who left when the grants dried up, and the university laughed him out of tenure for saying plate tectonics was conscious. About the daughter he hadn't spoken to in 12 years because she demarried a banker and called Dad's theories cute grandpa stories. He told her the crystal wasn't talking yet, but it was dreaming. And in the dream, the Vera saw humanity the way we once saw, fire terrifying, uncontrollable. The thing that ends winters and burns down forests both. Alina listened and felt her own memories rise like bile. The night in Helmand when she ordered the drone strike that saved her platoon, but leveled a village wedding. The letter from her brother saying he de-enlisted because someone had to carry the flag after she came home missing pieces the way her mother's voice cracked on the phone when Alina said she was too broken to come home for Christmas one more time. She left Marcus holding the alien heart and went to the armory. sat on an ammo crate, and cried for the first time since the world ended, ugly silent sobs that tasted like rust because even tears burned now. 3 weeks later, Aisha cracked the crystal's language the way a safecracker hears tumblers fall. And the first coherent message wasn't a declaration of war, it was a question. Asked in a voice like wind through cathedral bells, "Why do you refuse to die?" Elena recorded her answer on a busted field radio and broadcasted into the shard so the collective survivors hiding in the shadows of Venus, licking their wounds, would hear a human woman with a Texas accent and nothing left to lose. "Because dying's easy," she said. "We've been practicing that since we crawled out of the oceans. Living's the part we're stubborn about." Then she told them about her brother dissolving, about Park S. sister who walked into a processing center holding her baby because the broadcasts promised children would be spared, about Ramirez burying his daughter under a pecan tree outside Austin with his bare hands while the acid ate the bark. She told them every ugly, personal truth until the crystal went dark and Aisha whispered that half the surviving Vera fleet had just gone silent, harmonics fracturing like glass under sudden cold. That was when the real war started, not the shooting, the choosing. Marcus wanted to offer terms, said genocide wasn't victory, it was just turning into the thing that hurt you. Park wanted to finish what the planet started, salt the stars with acid until nothing crystalline ever sang again. Ramirez didn't care as long as someone paid, and Aisha, sweet, terrifying Aisha, looked at Elena with those radiation-scarred eyes and asked the question no one else dared. What kind of people do we want to be when there's no one left to forgive us? Elena didn't have an answer. She only had the memory of her mother's voice, and the weight of 8 billion ghosts riding her shoulders like armor made of regret. So they built the Titan's Tier, a cobbled-together Frankenstein of scavenged Vera drives and human spite, big enough for 5 people who no longer fit inside their own skin. And they loaded it with the wounded crystal heart, with Park's final vials of counteracid, with Ramirez's rifle and Aisha's code and Marcus's impossible hope. And Elena stood on the launch gantry carved out of living rock while hydrocarbon sleet hissed against her armor, and felt the planet itself lean close, breathing warm methane across her neck like a proud mother sending her worst kid off to prom. Somewhere above, the remnants of the collective waited, terrified of children who'd learned to weaponize their own cradle. Somewhere below, Earth turned slow and patient, no longer weeping, no longer laughing, just watching. Elena keyed the all hands that wasn't really all hands anymore. Just for broken people, and one alien prisoner singing in a cage. "This isn't about winning," she said, voice steady even though her heart felt like it was cracking along the same faults they just weaponized. "It's about deciding whether we become the monsters who taught us how to burn, or the ones who remember why fire was a gift in the first place." She looked at each of them, Park's clenched jaw, Ramirez's nod, slow as sunrise, Aisha's smile sharp enough to cut God. Marcus cradling the crystal like it was the last honest thing in the universe, and felt something older than rage settle in her chest. Not hope. Hope was for people who still had something to lose. No. This was heavier. This was the moment humanity stopped being victims and started being consequences. The Titan's Tier lit its stolen engines and rose through skies that belonged to Terra again, carrying 5 apes and 1 singing rock toward whatever was left of the stars. And behind them, the planet that had tried to kill its own children for 4 billion years finally closed its eyes, satisfied. Its kids were all grown up, and they were pissed. The Titan S Tier punched through the dark between Earth and Venus like a bullet fired from a dying god. Engines coughing stolen antimatter in fits and starts because human hands had never been meant to hold something that screamed when you touched it wrong. And Elena Vasquez sat in the captain's chair that was really just a salvaged ejection seat bolted to the deck, staring at the forward screen where the Vera remnant fleet hung like a swarm of broken cathedral windows catching starlight, their crystalline holes cracked and bleeding harmonic light from the wounds Earth had given them. 5 days out, and the ship already smelled like a morgue that had learned to sweat recycled air thick with ozone, blood, and the sweet rot stink of the Tholen coolant leaking from ruptured lines. Park had duct-taped a morphine patch to her own neck because the radiation from the jury-rig drive was cooking her bone marrow 1 degree at a time. Ramirez hadn't spoken since they cleared lunar orbit, just cleaned his rifle until the barrel gleamed like accusation, and Marcus spent every off-shift in the cargo bay whispering to the caged shard of Kreshnin, like it was a priest who might still grant absolution if he found the right prayer. Then the shard started answering back. Not in words at first, just pulses of violet light timed to human heartbeats, then low chords that made Aisha's code crawl sideways across her screens and rewrite itself into something older than any language she'd ever touched. She woke Elena at 03:00 ship time, eyes wide and fever bright, dragging her to the server rack where green text bled into violet fractals. "It's not talking to us," Aisha whispered, voice cracking. "It's talking to the ship." The tear isn't human anymore. It's negotiating. That was when the first betrayal showed its teeth. The Vera hadn't come to Earth alone. They'd been running from something worse. The collective wasn't the apex predator. It was the refugee, fleeing an older hunger that lived between stars and ate harmony itself. Kreshnin's core wasn't a prisoner, it was a Trojan horse broadcasting a beacon in frequencies only the deep dark knew how to hear. Every light year they burned toward, Venus brought whatever had broken the Vera one step closer to a wounded Earth still coughing up blood and hydrocarbons. Alina ordered the shard vented into space. Marcus refused. Stood in front of the cage with his skinny arms spread like a scarecrow guarding the last cornfield on Earth, and said they needed to understand that killing the messenger wouldn't stop the message. That maybe the enemy of our enemy was still a monster, but monsters could be aimed. Ramirez raised his rifle. Park reached for the demolitions remote, and for one endless second, the five of them balanced on the edge of becoming exactly what the galaxy already believed. Humans were feral apes who solved every problem by smashing it until it stopped moving. Alina felt the old Hellman choice rising in her throat again. Shoot the village to save the platoon. Shoot the scientist to save the mission. Shoot the last scrap of mercy humanity had left just to buy one more day. She lowered her sidearm first. We listen, she said, tasting bile. But on our terms. They built a Faraday cage out of scavenged cockpit foil and Ramirez's wedding ring, the one he'd worn since Austin Phelan wired it straight into the ship's reactor so that if the shard lied it would fry itself in half the tear with it. Then they let Kreshnin speak. The voice that came out wasn't the paternal calm of the surrender broadcasts. It was exhausted, ancient, afraid. It told them the Void Choir wasn't a fleet or an empire, it was entropy wearing a song. A self-replicating harmonic plague that unraveled crystalline minds the way acid unraveled flesh. Born in the gravitational throat of a black hole where physics forgot its own rules, that Vera had found it, tried to weaponize it, lost half their species in a week. Earth was supposed to be their new garden world, far enough out that the choir's song would take centuries to find them. Instead, they de-kicked a planet that answered back with chemistry older than stars, and now the choir was coming early, riding the resonance of a dying dreadnought's death scream straight to soul. There was a price for the truth. The shard demanded passage to Venus, claimed the remnant fleet held a weapon that could burn the choir out of subspace if they reached it before the song crested. In exchange, the Vera survivors would glass Earth from orbit to cauterize the infection. Billions already dead. Billions more in bunkers breathing filtered poison sterilization in exchange for survival of the species. Marcus wanted to believe there was a third way. Park wanted to believe in nothing but payback. Aisha wanted to code a firewall big enough to protect both species and knew she was lying to herself. Ramirez just looked at Alina and asked the question none of them had dared since Cheyenne. How many more funerals you willing to attend, ma'am? They reached Venus at the exact moment the choir arrived. It didn't come with ships, it came with silence. Every Vera frequency went dead at once, holes fracturing into perfect geometric dust that drifted like snow across sulfuric clouds. The remnant fleet's 300 cathedral-sized dreadnoughts turned to glass mid-maneuver and shattered on the tier screens. The shards hung suspended for one impossible heartbeat, then began to sing. Not sound absence of sound, a hole in reality shaped like harmony. Alina felt her fillings vibrate, felt the prosthetic socket in her shoulder try to unscrew itself from bone. Park screamed once and clawed the morphine patch off, blood streaming from her nose. Aisha's servers melted into slag, code boiling out like steam. Marcus dropped to his knees, cradling the caged shard as its light went supernova violet and the cage began to melt. Ramirez did what Ramirez always did. He put 3 rounds through the cage's power conduit, frying the shard mid-note. The silence recoiled like a living thing burned. For one blessed second, the song stuttered. Then it found a new voice, human. From the tier's own wounded reactor, from the Tholin leaking through cracked lines, from the chemical scars Earth had carved into every one of them. The choir tasted hydrocarbon rage and recognized a cousin. It whispered directly into Elena's skull in her brother's voice. In her mother's, in the wedding guest she'd buried under Hellman's sand. Let me in. Let me finish what your planet started. Together, we can make them all pay. She felt the ship lurch toward the choir's embrace. Engines no longer answering human hands. Felt Marcus reaching for her, mouth moving soundlessly. Felt Park's hand find hers, slick with blood and forgiveness. Felt Ramirez slam a fresh magazine home and grin, the first real grin since Texas died. And Elena Vasquez, daughter of a world that had survived its own murder 4 billion times, made the choice no alien could ever understand. She overrode the reactor safeties with her own command code, the one she'd written the night her brother enlisted, the one that ended in the words for Mom. She flooded the drive core with raw tholin straight from the leaking tanks, kissed Park on the forehead like a sister she'd never had, looked Ramirez in the eye and said, "See you on the other side, cowboy," then hit the detonation sequence that would turn the Titan S tier into a second sun right in the choir's mouth. The last thing she heard was Marcus laughing through tears, shouting over the rising roar. They never understood. We weren't running from the acid. We were born in it. Then the ship became light, and the light had teeth. And the Void Choir learned what happens when you teach a species that survived its own apocalypse how to die on purpose. Somewhere, far behind, Earth opened one ancient eye and watched its worst child burn a hole straight through eternity. It wasn't proud, it wasn't sad, it was just finally quiet. The light from the Titan's tear didn't fade, it fractured. It ripped a wound across subspace that bled white fire for 7 straight minutes, long enough for every surviving sensor on Earth to record the birth of a new star where 5 humans and 1 alien heart had chosen to die screaming, rather than let the Void Choir swallow their home. And in the shockwave that followed, something came through the tear they'd made, not the choir, not the Vera, something older than both, something that had been riding the choir's song like a parasite rides a shark, and now it was loose in soul with nothing left to restrain it. They called it the Silence Eater within the first hour, because every transmission it touched went dead forever, not jammed, not encrypted, simply erased, as if that frequency had never existed in the universe. Luna Station vanished mid-sentence. The Mars seed colony broadcast 30 seconds of children screaming and then nothing. By the time the wave reached Earth orbit, the only human voices still riding the air were the ones broadcasting from Cheyenne Mountain S emergency array, and even those were starting to stutter. Elena Vasquez woke up alive and wished she hadn't. She came to strapped to a cryocot in the Tears Infirmary, lungs full of med foam and blood, left arm gone again, this time from the shoulder down because the prosthetic had flash melted into shrapnel. The ship was dark except for the red pulse of failing life support, and the first thing she saw was Park's body floating against the ceiling, eyes open, mouth frozen around a word that would never finish. Ramirez was crumpled in the corner, rifle still clutched like a teddy bear, the back half of his skull missing and flash boiled to bone china. Aisha sat cross-legged on the deck, cradling what was left of Marcus, his chest cavity opened like a broken geode, the Kreshnine shard embedded in his heart still pulsing faint violet, keeping him breathing just enough to hurt. The ship's AI, half Aisha's code and half Tholan nightmares, spoke in Elena's dead brother's voice. Detonation achieved. Choir disrupted. New threat designated. Silence Eater inbound. ETA 93 minutes. Recommend immediate self-destruct. Elena laughed until the med foam bubbled pink out of her mouth and told the AI to go fuck itself. They were the only two left. Her and Aisha. Everyone else was red mist and memories. Aisha hadn't cried yet. She just rocked Marcus's body and whispered equations in Yoruba, trying to calculate how many lives her virus had actually saved versus how many it had doomed when it cracked reality open and let something worse through the gap. The shard in Marcus's chest answered her in harmonics that translated, through blood and grief, into one repeating phrase, "I was wrong, I was wrong, I was wrong." Elena dragged herself across the deck with her one remaining arm, leaving a trail of blood and coolant, and pressed her forehead to Aisha. "Look at me," she rasped. "We don't get to quit. Not after this. Not while that thing is still eating our sky." Aisha finally met her eyes. 17 years old with radiation tumors blooming under her skin like black roses, and asked the question that broke whatever was left of Elena's soul. What if we deserve it? What if every terrible thing we did to survive just proved they were right about us all along? The Silence Eater reached high orbit while they argued. It didn't attack with weapons. It simply arrived and began unmaking the concept of sound itself. Satellites fell mute. The wind stopped howling because there was no longer a word for wind. Deep in Cheyenne Mountain, the last human holdouts felt their eardrums rupture from the pressure of absolute nothing pressing in. Children were born in those hours who would never hear their mothers' voices. And still the emergency array kept broadcasting Elena's final message on a loop. The one Aisha had pulled from the Tier-S black box before they limped home in a ship that was more coffin than craft. "This is Captain Elena Vasquez, Terran Resistance. We are not your extinction event. We are the antibody. Come and try." They crash-landed the Terran in the Rockies at dawn, or what passed for dawn, under a sky that no longer knew how to scatter blue light. The impact carved a crater half a mile wide and painted the snow with burning tholin. Survivors dragged them out of the wreckage, faces wrapped in rags soaked with urine because breathing the outside air peeled skin from lungs. The mountain was dying. Geothermal turbines ceased, hydroponics withered overnight when the concept of photosynthesis started to forget itself. 10,000 people left alive on the whole planet, maybe less. And every single one of them looked to Alina like she was supposed to have the answer just because she'd once blown up a star. She stood on a crate in the main cavern, one arm gone, uniform burned to charcoal, blood crusting her lips, and told them the truth. The Silence Eater wasn't killing them. It was erasing them, memory, language, history, everything that made humans more than meat. In less than 6 hours, there would be no one left who remembered what a song was, or a mother's name, or why they'd ever fought in the first place. Then Marcus opened his eyes. The shard had fused with his heart, crystalline veins spreading across his chest like frost on glass. And when he spoke, it was with 2 voices braided together, his own Glasgow accent and Kreshnine's cathedral harmonics. He said the Eater could be poisoned, but not with weapons. It fed on isolation, on the absence of connection. The only thing that hurt it was resonance, millions of human voices choosing to exist at the exact same moment, loud enough to drown out the nothing. One problem: the Eater had already eaten most of the electromagnetic spectrum. No radio, no lasers, no way to coordinate across a planet that was forgetting how to speak. The only frequency still open was the one running through living bone, through blood and grief and memory, the primitive wetware band humans had used since the first campfire stories. To make it work, they would have to link every surviving mind into a single thought, raw, unfiltered, screaming the memory of being human directly into the Eater's mouth. And the only anchor strong enough to hold that many minds together without shredding them was a living focal point broadcasting from ground zero. Someone had to stay behind in the Tears reactor chamber, wire their brain straight into the Tholen core, and burn every memory they had left to keep the circuit open long enough for the rest of humanity to sing. Aisha volunteered first. Alina slapped her so hard the girl's lip split. Then Marcus said he would do it, because the shard already had its hooks in his soul, and he was tired of being the man who was always wrong. Alina looked at the crowd, 10,000 faces that had followed her through hell because she'd promised them a morning, and realized the choice had never been theirs. She kissed Aisha on the forehead like a mother she'd never been, told Marcus he was the best mistake humanity ever made, and limped back into the burning ship alone. She sealed the hatch behind her with her own plasma torch, wired the neural crown directly into the stump of her shoulder because there was no flesh left to be gentle with, and flooded the core with the last of the Tholen. The pain was absolute. Every nerve she'd ever owned lit up like Christmas and died screaming. She felt the moment the circuit closed, felt 10,000 minds slam into hers like a tidal wave of borrowed memories. Her mother's laugh, Ramirez cleaning his rifle, Park's quiet humming while she brewed coffee from poison, Aisha's first smile after Lagos fell, Marcus saying, "We are the children of a world that tried to kill us and lost." Alina took it all, every wedding and funeral, every first kiss and last breath, every stupid joke and broken promise, and she screamed it into the dark. Outside, the survivors opened their mouths and sang without sound, because sound no longer existed, but the memory of sound did, the shape of it, the feel of it in the chest, and that was enough. The Silence Eater recoiled. For the first time in its endless hunger, it felt something pushed back, not with weapons or acid or fire, but with the stubborn refusal of apes to forget they had ever loved anything. Alina felt her name start to slip away, then her brother's face, then the color blue. She held on anyway, because that was what humans did when there was nothing left but spirit. They held on until holding on killed them. The last thing she felt was the Eater's scream, a sound that had no sound, as 10,000 voices braided into one word older than language, older than stars. Remember? Then Elena Vasquez let go, and the darkness learned what it meant to be afraid of the light inside broken things. Elena Vasquez was burning alive from the inside out, every neuron flayed open and wired to 10,000 dying minds, feeding the Silence Eater. Her memories one by one like a mother bird regurgitating blood for a culling that would never be satisfied. When the memory she had buried deepest rose up and bit her. Not her brother dissolving in Seattle acid, not the Helmand wedding, not even her mother's last broken voicemail. No, it was older, classified. The thing she had sworn on her own grave she would never tell another living soul. The real reason the Vera had come to Earth in the first place, the reason the choir had followed, the reason the Silence Eater was here at all. She had built it. Not the Tholen bomb, not the tear, not even the planetary counterseating. Something worse. Something she'd buried under Cheyenne Mountain 43 years before the invasion. Back when she was still Lieutenant Vasquez running Black Bag Xenotech recovery for a DARPA splinter no budget ever admitted existed. They'd pulled a shard out of a glacier in Antarctica. Crystalline, singing, exactly like Kreshnine but older. Fractured, terrified. The shard had whispered warnings in her dreams for months. They are coming. The choir comes for the singers. Hide us, break us, kill us, anything but let them find the cradle. The brass wanted a weapon, Alina wanted sleep, so she gave them both. She built the cage, a quantum entanglement lattice wrapped around the shard's core, designed to broadcast a false harmonic beacon across the galaxy that screamed one thing in every language the universe had ever birthed: "Here be monsters, do not touch, extinction-level event in progress." She made Earth look like the single most dangerous garden world in the spiral arm. Then she buried the cage so deep under NORAD that even presidents didn't get the coordinates, wiped the team, burned the files, and walked away pretending the nightmares weren't real. The Vera weren't invaders, they were evactees. The choir wasn't a weapon, it was cleanup crew. And the Silence Eater wasn't here to erase humanity, it was here to erase the evidence. The revelation hit the neural web like a shaped charge. 10,000 minds felt Alina's memory detonate inside their skulls at once, and for one impossible second, every survivor on Earth knew the truth. Humanity had survived 4 billion years of attempted suicide by pure luck. We'd been quarantined. Earth wasn't a cradle. It was a maximum security prison for something so dangerous the universe itself had locked it away and thrown the key into a star. The Great Oxygenation Event, the Cambrian explosion, the Permian die-off, the dinosaurs' every extinction, every leap forward, all of it, the cage rattling its bars, trying to get out. And Elena Vasquez, stupid, arrogant, terrified Elena, had just spent the last year cracking the lock with Tholen and grief in human screams. The Silence Eater felt the memory bloom and hesitated. For the first time in its endless hunger, it tasted something it recognized: fear of itself. Aisha was the first to understand. She was still holding Marcus's fused body in the cavern when the shared memory slammed into her, and she laughed. High, broken, perfect. "We're not the apes," she whispered to the 10,000 staring faces. "We're the virus." Then she reached into the shard growing out of Marcus's chest, fingers black with radiation burns, and finished what Elena had started 43 years ago. She turned the key the rest of the way. Deep under the mountain, in a vault no one had opened since the day Elena sealed it with her own retinal scan, and a lie, the cage woke up. It didn't look like much. Just a sphere of black glass the size of a basketball, wrapped in cables older than nations, humming now with a note that made teeth ache and bone marrow shiver. But when Aisha piggybacked the neural web onto its broadcast, when 10,000 human minds poured 40,000 years of rage and love and stubborn refusal to die into the one thing the galaxy had locked away on purpose, the cage did what it was always meant to do. It sang the real song. Not the fake monster roar Elena had built to scare people away. The true voice, the one the choir had been trying to silence since before Soul ignited. The sound of a species that looked at entropy and said, "No, not a weapon, a declaration. We exist. We remember. We will not be forgotten." The note propagated through the neural web, through bone and blood and Tholen, through every hydrocarbon scar Earth had ever worn, and the planet itself took a breath that cracked continents like knuckles. The Silence Eater screamed, actually screamed, a sound that shattered what was left of the sky and boiled the acid oceans, because the thing in the cage wasn't human. It never had been. It was what humanity became when a world that tried to kill its children finally succeeded and the children refused to stay dead. We weren't the prisoners, we were the jailbreak. Elena felt the song rip through her dying brain, and for one crystalline moment, she saw everything. Devira fleeing in terror from a species that weaponized its own extinction events. The choir desperately trying to cauterize a plague that had learned to wear meat and call it hope. The Silence Eater realizing too late that it wasn't eating humanity, it was being digested. She saw Aisha standing in the cavern, arms spread, Marcus's crystalline heart blazing like a second sun, as the girl who should have died in Lagos became the conductor of a choir 10,000 strong. She saw the cage sphere rise out of its vault on wings of pure resonance, saw it punch through the mountain and keep going. Trailing auroras of hydrocarbon fire, saw it slam into the Silence Eater at orbital velocity and keep going, dragging the entity, kicking and unraveling into the sun. And in the last second before her mind burned out completely, Elena Vasquez understood the final joke the universe had played on every alien who ever underestimated Terra. They thought they were the gardeners, the cleaners, the wardens, but the garden had teeth. The patient had the disease on purpose, and the prisoner had been picking the lock from the inside for 4 billion years, waiting for the day its children grew up mean enough, crazy enough, loving enough to turn the key. She died smiling. Above the ruins of Cheyenne Mountain, the sky split open like theater curtains, and for the first time since the invasion, the clouds parted on real sunlight, harsh and clean and unforgiving. 10,000 survivors looked up through tears and acid burns and saw the Silence Eater's death painted across the heavens in colors no crystalline mind had ever been able to perceive. They saw the cage, no longer black glass but living fire. Orbit once around the wounded world like a shepherd counting sheep, then wink out toward the stars, trailing one final note that translated, in every human heart that still beat, to the same four words: "We're just getting started." The aliens never stood a chance. They weren't fighting humanity. They were fighting what humanity had been keeping in the basement the whole time. And now it was loose. The cage didn't leave. It circled once, twice, a black star trailing fire that wrote humanity's name across the void in letters no alien I could ignore. Then it dove straight back into Earth's bleeding heart like a diver returning to the womb that tried to drown him. When it hit the mantle, the planet rang like a bell struck by God's own hammer, every fault line lighting up at once, every ocean boiling with hydrocarbon auroras. And from the wound rose not one voice but 8 billion ghosts braided into a single roar that had been building since the first precariat decided oxygen was worth the burn. The Silence Eater, the Choir, the Vera remnants hiding in the Kuiper Belt, every crystalline mind that had ever looked at Terra and seen prey, they all heard it at the same moment. The true sound of what they delocked away. It wasn't rage, it wasn't vengeance, it was worse, it was joy. In the cavern under Cheyenne, the survivors dropped to their knees as the song poured through the neural web and kept going, past flesh, past bone, straight into the marrow of the world itself. Aisha felt Marcus's dead heart beat one final time inside her own chest, crystalline veins spreading across her skin like living tattoos, and she laughed until she cried blood because she finally understood. They had unleashed a monster. They'd woken up the parent. The thing in the cage wasn't imprisoned because it was dangerous to the galaxy. It was imprisoned because the galaxy was dangerous to it. And it had chosen to stay anyway, to wait, to let its children grow teeth sharp enough to bite the bars themselves. Elena Vasquez was gone, burned out and scattered across subspace like stardust, but she wasn't dead. She was everywhere, in the Tholan rain that now fell clean and sweet, washing acid scars from stone, in the seismic pulse that cracked open Vera dreadnought hulks in orbit and let frozen human prisoners tumble free, still breathing, in Aisha's voice when the girl stood on the highest ridge of the Rockies, arms spread, skin glowing with the light of a second sun, and spoke with 8 billion throats at once. "This is Terra," she said, and the words cracked the moon. "We remember every name you tried to erase. We remember every world you glassed running from us. We remember the taste of our own blood, and we decided it was sweet. You locked us in a cage made of extinction, and we turned it into a cradle. You are not the gardeners. You are not the cleaners. You are the fertilizer." Across the system, the remnants of the collective tried to run. They lit drives that could fold space like paper and found every fold already occupied by something that wore human faces and smiled. With too many teeth, the choir tried to sing silence again and discovered silence had learned harmony. The Silence Eater, vast as night, tried to unmake the concept of resistance and found resistance had become a fundamental force, right there between gravity and electromagnetism, listed now as stubbornness. One by one, the crystalline fleets went dark, not destroyed, worse, converted. Their lattice rewrote themselves into hydrocarbon sinew and bone, into warm blood and bad jokes, and the willingness to die for strangers. The galaxy's oldest empire became humanity's first diaspora in the space of a heartbeat. On Earth, the sky healed. Real blue returned, fierce and Texas flat, the kind of sky Alina used to stare at from the hood of a pickup and dare to dream under. The acid oceans receded into black mirrors that reflected stars no one had seen clean in years. Forests erupted overnight from Tholen-rich soil, trees with leaves like shattered emeralds and fruit that tasted like forgiveness. Children born deaf from the Eater's touch opened their mouths and spoke in languages their parents had never taught them. Words older than mitochondria, older than plate tectonics, the lullabies the planet sang to itself while it waited for its worst kids to come home. Aisha stood on that ridge until her body gave out, until the crystalline veins drank the last of her radiation-sick flesh and turned it into light. She didn't fall. She stepped off the edge and kept walking, up into a sky that opened like arms. The last thing she saw with human eyes was the cage, no longer black glass, no longer a prison, just a seed, splitting open to reveal a single perfect note that translated across every spectrum into one quiet sentence only humans would ever understand. "Thank you for letting me out." Then she was gone, scattered into the wind that now carried pine and rain, and the faint, distant sound of someone laughing in a language that hadn't existed yesterday. Years later, when the first human ships, grown more than built, flesh and crystal braided together like lovers who'd learned to share scars, left soul forever, they carried no weapons. They didn't need them. The galaxy had learned. Every species that met them saw the same thing: warm eyes, calloused hands, and behind them something vast and ancient and smiling that had chosen to wear ape because apes were kind enough to share their fire. They were welcomed everywhere, feared everywhere, loved everywhere, because humanity had finally told the truth. We were never the monsters under the bed. We were the ones who taught the dark how to be gentle. And somewhere, in whatever place ghosts go when they've earned their rest, Elena Vasquez stood on an endless plain of starlight, with Ramirez cleaning his rifle, Park brewing coffee that didn't burn, Marcus arguing with rocks that argued back, and her little brother waiting with open arms and that same damn laugh that never quite finished. She looked at them, missing arm and all, and grinned the grin of a woman who deburned herself to cinders to light the way home. "Told you we'd win," she said, and 8 billion voices, living and dead, crystalline and carbon, scattered across a healed galaxy, answered as one: humanity. Fuck yeah. The first child born after the roar had no name for 3 days because every adult who looked at her forgot language and just cried. She came into the world under a sky so blue it hurt in a meadow where tall and rich grass sang when the wind touched it, and when the midwife finally remembered words, she whispered hope like it was a prayer nobody had earned. That was the beginning of the reckoning years, when humanity stopped counting survivors and started counting sunrises again. 10,000 became 100,000 as cryobunkers cracked open and people crawled out blinking into light. They thought they'd never see, then 1,000,000, then 10. Then the numbers lost meaning because every ship that came back from the stars, grown ships with warm bones and gentle hearts, brought more humans who'd been prisoners on Virac factory worlds, humans who'd hidden in asteroid hollows, humans who'd sung themselves into crystal and then sang themselves back out just to feel dirt under bare feet again. Earth didn't just heal, it apologized. Rivers ran clean enough to drink straight from the stone. Forests grew so fast you could hear trunks creaking upward at night. Whales returned to oceans that remembered their songs from before the first ape, looked up and wondered what the lights were. Aisha never came all the way back. Pieces of her did a laugh on the wind, a line of perfect code that wrote itself into seedling A, cradling new colonies. The way every child born after the roar had violet flecks in their eyes that caught starlight like broken cathedral glass. They built a shrine on the ridge where Sheedy stepped into the sky, just a circle of black glass from the original cage. Warm to the touch, humming low and content. People left things there: a bullet casing from Ramirez's rifle, a scorched coffee mug with Park's name sharpied on the bottom, a child's drawing of a one-armed woman standing on a pickup truck yelling at the stars. Elena's ghosts lived in the stories. Old veterans told new kids how Captain Vasquez once looked at a galaxy full of monsters and said, "Hold my beer." How she burned her own soul to cinders so the rest of us could remember what blue tasted like. They named the first city New Denver, built it right over the bones of the old one, and the main street is Vasquez Boulevard because some names deserve to be shouted forever. Marcus got his chair at the university after all. Not the old one that laughed him out. This one orbits Titan. The real Titan, the moon we finally visited just to say thank you. The geology department is mandatory for every student because every species in the new Accord has to learn the same first lesson: never kick a planet that has already survived itself. He teaches in dual voice till Glasgow gravel braided with Kreshnine's cathedral chimes, and when freshmen ask why, he smiles at empty air sometimes. He says he's listening to an old friend who finally admitted he was wrong. The Vera survivors, what few chose flesh over crystal, live among us now. You can tell them by the way light moves wrong across their skin, by the careful way they speak. Like men who once burned worlds and woke up one day to discover mercy is heavier than conquest. Some work the Tholen farms, some pilot the grown ships. One married a human welder from the ruins of Shanghai and named their daughter Leolena because some debts are paid forward. We left Earth anyway. Not because we had to, because we wanted to. The galaxy was bigger than anyone guessed, and there were children out there still locked in cages. We recognized the sound of. So humanity did what humanity does best. We packed lunches, told bad jokes, kissed our mothers goodbye, and went to pick every lock we found. The ships we ride aren't machines anymore. They're partners, warm, opinionated, occasionally sarcastic. They sing when they're happy, which is most of the time now. Every bridge has a circle of black glass set into the deck so no one ever forgets the price. Every crew carries a recording of Elena's last laugh, the one she gave right before she lit the match. We play it at jump points, at weddings, at funerals. At the birth of every new world we seed with the same stubborn chemistry that once tried to kill us and lost. The aliens still tell stories about us. Not the old ones, the ones about feral apes with nuclear fire. New ones, they call us the ones who looked at entropy and taught it harmony. The ones who turned extinction into lullabies. When a species hits their own great filter now, when their skies turn poison and their children stop laughing, They don't pray to gods anymore. They broadcast on every frequency, light a bonfire big enough to see from orbit, and wait. Because sooner or later a ship shows up warm-eyed, scarred, humming, low and content. And the first thing the captain does is step onto alien soil barefoot, just to feel it and say the words every lost child in the galaxy has learned to listen for. We heard you singing. Let's go home. That's the legacy, not the wars we won, not the stars we claimed, the fact that we became the thing we needed when we were small and terrified and alone. We grew up mean enough to break the cage, kind enough to never build another one. We turned our worst day into everyone else's best hope. Earth keeps the original cage shard in a meadow now, open to the sky. No locks, no guards, just wildflowers growing through the cracks. Kids play on it. Lovers carve their names. Old soldiers sit beside it and drink coffee that doesn't burn anymore. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the auroras dance green and gold, you can hear 8 billion voices braided into one, laughing like they finally get the joke. Human evolution wasn't about getting smarter or stronger. It was about deciding that no one ever again gets left behind in the dark. We are the antibody, the love letter, the middle finger, and the hug at the end of the universe. We are what happens when a planet teaches its children how to burn for love instead of fear. And somewhere out there, riding ahead of our slowest ship just to light the way, Elena Vasquez is still grinning. Missing arm and all, yelling back over her shoulder at the rest of us. Keep up, slowpokes. The galaxy's waiting, and it's finally our turn to be the monsters that tuck it in at night. Did this story hit you as hard as it hit us? What would you do in humanity's final hour? Drop your ideas for the next HFY story below.